Hello everyone. My name is Alaric Fisher from the Department of Parks, Environment and Water Security. Thank you for joining this webinar. Before we hear about the results from the individual studies, I'm going to give you a brief introduction to the Beetaloo Shrever as a whole. I'll also present a summary of the overall outcomes of the Shrever at the end of the webinar. The Shrever addresses a major set of recommendations from the scientific inquiry into hydraulic fracturing in the Northern Territory. The report from that public inquiry was handed down in April 2018, just over 5 years ago. You can still access and read that report on the web. In its deliberations, the inquiry panel had heard that where onshore gas or coal seam gas development had already occurred, such as in Queensland or in the United States, the lack of pre-development baseline data was a major issue for environmental assessment and regulation. The inquiry recognised that comprehensive and consistently collected baseline information was essential for planning the rollout of any new onshore gas industry, for properly assessing and mitigating risks, and for recognising any future impacts from that development. Consequently, the inquiry laid out a vision for systematic regional environmental baseline studies, which it termed as Shrever, to address the key knowledge gaps that it identified, particularly using the example of the Beetaloo Basin. As you can see on this slide, the inquiry described the purpose of a Shrever as to provide the information necessary for appropriate decisions to be made about the development of any onshore gas industry in the Territory, including assessment of water and biodiversity resources, to inform land use planning, and the collection of baseline data to provide a reference point for ongoing monitoring. The inquiry in its report set out some guidance about the baseline study areas or domains that should be included in a Shrever. This included a very diverse set covering 6 domains: water quality and quantity, including coverage of both groundwater and surface water; aquatic ecosystems, which is essentially the ecology of water-related systems; terrestrial ecosystems, the ecology of land-based systems; greenhouse gases, and a regional baseline level of greenhouse gases, particularly methane; environmental health, which is aspects of the environment that can affect human health, such as air quality and water quality; and social, cultural, and economic baseline studies. As a large-scale regional study, the Shrever is unique in having such a broad scope of physical, biological, and socio-cultural elements. The inquiry report provided some guidance about the necessary content of each baseline study, but without prescriptive detail about how each one should be carried out. So after the inquiry was complete, we spent quite some time developing guidance about the content of a Shrever, including detailed technical guidance of what was required for each study. This was published in the Shrever framework, which had input from a broad range of subject matter experts, as well as being put out for public comment. And you can look at the Shrever framework on the web also. The different Shrever baseline studies have been carried out by appropriate subject matter experts in that particular domain. The water and ecology studies were carried out by the Department of Environment, Parks and Water Security, as we have many of the scientific experts in these areas and decades of experience in such studies. However, external expertise was sourced for some specialist research areas, including, for example, from Charles Darwin University for some of the water tracer and terrestrial invertebrate work, and a company called Biota Environmental Services for work on Steiger fauna. CSIRO carried out the greenhouse gas baseline studies. Various consultants did aspects of the environmental health studies with input from the NT Health Department. And social impact experts from the University of Queensland were commissioned to do the social, cultural and economic baseline studies, also with assistance from local NT experts. Overall, around 100 participants, scientists and technical experts from 10 research agencies and organisations were involved in data collection and reporting for the Shrever. The Shrever baseline studies generally commenced during 2020. But as you might remember, that was when the COVID pandemic had arrived in the territory, and most of the study area was enclosed biosecurity zones, making local consultation and access very difficult. Consequently, most of the on-ground work was done in 2021 and 2022. The map on your screen provides context to where the Shrieva studies occurred. The blue line shows the boundary of the geological area known as the Beetaloo Subbasin, which is the area where the gas reserves occur. The black line shows a small easterly extension of gas-bearing rocks with similar geology. Together, this area, which we'll call the Beetaloo Subbasin, covers an area of about 28,000 square kilometres. However, we considered it was important to collect baseline data not just from this area, but from a broader area surrounding it. This was in order to provide a broader regional context to what was found within the subbasin, and also to include areas where there was potential for off-site impacts from the development of any large gas field. So the largest Shrieva study area is shown in yellow and covers an area of about 86,000 square kilometres, stretching from just north of Mataranka in the north down to Elliott and Lake Woods in the south. This made the geographic scope of the Shrieva very large, as this is an area of about 20% larger than Tasmania. As you will hear during the water studies presentation, the water studies covered an even larger area because they needed to get an understanding of the full extent of the aquifers that go well to the south of the Beetaloo region. So that's a brief introduction to the Shrieva. For most of the rest of this webinar, you will hear from the project leaders of the baseline study domains, who will give you an overview of the results from each of those studies. I'll be back at the end of the day for an overall summary of the Shrieva outcomes. I hope you enjoy the presentations.